So I wanted to start with a conversation about how your experience, how your businesses in wholesaling have evolved over the years. Because it's obviously an important part of the pharmaceutical distribution in Australia. And so how's the business changed?
Well, from an API point of view, if you go back 10 years ago, we were fundamentally a wholesaler. But with PBS reforms and the government changes that we foresaw at the time, it was really about what model would take us forward and what would diversify our earnings, because we're public companies and we need to make minimum returns and sustainable returns for the long haul. So that's when we embarked on our retail strategy, which was really about diversifying our income and at the same time providing pharmacists with a model that wasn't all about the dispensary. So 50% of the returns coming from the dispensary and 50% coming from the front of shop. So that was the journey and if you like, the strategy that we took, which is clearly quite different to what these guys have undertaken, but that's fundamentally what API did.
Look, I think probably each company is attacking the same issue but slightly differently. None of us have abandoned pharmaceutical distribution to community pharmacy. In fact, it's central to our business in Australia, but we've diversified geographically, we've diversified across multiple channels, we're in animal care, but our intention is never to abandon drug distribution. We need that to be strong. That said, to be too reliant on it is a poor strategy, and finding things you can do that are profitable and are not too far from that core have been our approach, and I think mirrored with the other guys as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think just to pick up one of the points Richard was making, one of the other things that sometimes gets forgotten is a lot of what all three of us have been doing has been about helping pharmacy on that journey as well. Like if our customers aren't profitable, then we don't have sustainable businesses, be it PBS or other products that we sort of distribute through pharmacy. So the imperative for us to diversify our business models sort of comes at a company level, but it also comes at a customer level as well. So we always think about it in terms of sort of logical adjacency. So, right, what are the things we can do that leverage off the same skills or infrastructure that provide a platform for growth? Because I think for all three of us, with what's happened with PBS reform over the last 10 years in particular, relying on PBS for growth, it's just not an option, right? In fact, it's a slight drag on all the businesses. So I think it'd be a terrible day for all of us if that was no longer an important part of what we do, right? But in the interim, we've got to make sure that we put a platform for growth in there.
Is that a risk?
I think the customers themselves, the pharmacists, aren't doing exactly the same things in their business. They're trying really hard to find other ways to be relevant and to make a return on the business, but they're not abandoning the core distribution of medicines and the care that goes with that. And neither are we, but we've got to move as they need to move to be prosperous.
How much of a risk is what you describe in terms of wholesaling in Australia and distribution? It seems that the pricing environment has been evolving since reform started in the middle of last decade. And we're at this point now, but I mean, how close to the tipping point are you from an investor perspective?
Well, look, I guess hopefully the regulation and review panel process gives us an opportunity not to get to that point at all, right? I mean, I think that's one of the reasons we've been so keen to engage with them, is to say, look, we are getting closer to that tipping point. There is an opportunity and a platform to be able to address these sorts of issues. So I would hope that we can get some recognition of that out of this process, and there'll be changes in place to hopefully avoid that position. But inevitably at some point, as Richard says, we're all publicly listed companies. We have to generate an acceptable level of return. We've looked at other activities to support our overall growth platforms, but if at some point there's no longer an adequate return for what we do, then all of us will change our business models to cope.
I think it's a continuation of the conversation that was happening in the lead up to the sixth agreement, where the topic of the current funding model, the viability of drug distribution in Australia was on the table, but we got clear feedback that it was time to put a more thorough argument, a better supported, objective, data-driven document or arguments in front of the department And the review, as Mark said, gives us that window now to pick up that discussion, which it was acknowledged at the time as being valid, but a need for a more rigorous debate. And our views are now expressed in writing for everyone to have a look at. Very little of it has been redacted, so it's available for people to have a look at. We've taken that opportunity very, very seriously. And we do outline in our submissions that we're approaching that point where something needs to change. And it is, I think it's a very important moment for the industry right now.
Yeah, and look, the only point I'd add to that is that I think the department, two things. The department's has, the processes that have been put in place have clearly controlled the cost of healthcare in Australia. There's no disputing that. So the department's been successful in its objectives through that. Along the way, they've recognised that the wholesalers have been part of that process and have had their profitability cut and marginalised. So there is recognition, clear recognition that there's an impact on wholesalers. The issue is when. When does it reach the tipping point? And from our point of view, the LEK modelling, LEK Consulting, we engaged them as part of the MPSA submission. They've done put together a very rigorous submission, and that says that within the next 12 months or so, we reach that point.